live. Um, and so hopefully that is correct. Uh, Welcome everybody to Story Street. It is a wonderful place to live. Um, this is not at all like Stepford. Uh, unless you're in the Iowa Writers Workshop, which we were no, it's just that's a joke. No. Everybody, welcome if you are on the chat or if you're watching this later. Uh, this is our Striving Novelists Support Group. So we talk about the issues that we're personally having in our writing situations, um, and some topics that we can all kind of get each other's feedback on. This is not a critique group. This is all for writing support. So um, I don't know. I think we might have one other person who's going to be popping in on the video here if she shows up here. Um, but first thing we do always is kind of we go around the circle and everybody kind of talks about how their writing has been this past week, and what challenges they may have had or how good it was. I don't know. We'll see if Michelle has another banger week this from last one.
No,
Um, no,
not quite
no,
as
okay,
successful as last week.
good. Yeah. So, who wants to go first?
I'll jump in since
Okay.
I already started. I this week did the New York City, what is it, NYC Midnight
Midnight.
Challenge. For people who are not familiar with that, we can drop a link. It's a lot of fun. It was 100-word story, and you get a genre, a word, and an action, and you have to write it in 24 hours. So I did that with Josie and Elisa, and it was fun. I mean, that was probably the most productive writing thing I did this week. Um, but I did keep submitting, so there's that.
That's excellent. That's a really good challenge. We have several of us who are doing that. Elisa, who also.
That's how.
I'll go. Oh, sorry, Josie. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You can go, Jack.
I have had quite a challenge getting back into writing, but I decided to jumpstart by taking a course on narratively in personal essays, and I've I've also been writing some finally, and um, and I found I really like the personal essays. We talked about it as a group maybe 2 weeks ago on this broadcast about how writing, among other things, helps you think through your own ideas and thoughts. It's not just capturing them. And I found that uh, I had a great experience writing. I probably only wrote 1,000 words, but it was enriching to me, and so I feel like that's a good step for me towards breaking uh, my writer's block.
That sounds great. Like, I would love to hear once we're doing more with that, kind of hear like a little retrospective. Maybe you could even do an article for Story Street about it, to how that's kind of looking back on it and value of it. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, sorry, the page wouldn't load.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. Um, Josie, is that a Sherlock Holmes cup?
It is. It is the Sherlock Holmes cup.
I saw the pipe, and I went straight from pipe and a key. So.
Yeah. What is it? The Unemployed Philosophers Guild people.
Oh, I like.
They've got the best stuff. Yeah. So I wrote a little bit this week because, like Jack, I've been really struggling. And I wrote a little bit doing what you had talked about, Michael, about like just kind of writing a little bit each day. and I just wrote like little microfictions, and they were really fun, and there was no pressure involved there. So yeah, that worked really well for me, and it definitely like started making me feel creative again. And I did my NYC Midnights. I really thought that it wasn't going to happen because I was not feeling well. Came down with something and just was not feeling well. But thanks to my group, they helped me like put all my thoughts in order and get something ready to turn in. So I love those. I love those contests. They're just really fun, and so
Nice.
I was happy to get something in.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, since you called me out, I'll go ahead and go too. I've been continuing like what I talked about last week, where I have like a morning writing, this morning pages or morning spark, whatever. I just kind of scribble like free association in the morning, and then I'm doing in the evening. I was doing like a story of the day, kind of, again, just try and write like a story or an idea or a part of a story or anything. And it's not always morning and evening, and it's not always, it's just whatever. And I did not do it every day, but I did end up writing more than I would have if I wasn't doing that. And I didn't miss anything. If the days that I didn't miss, I wasn't on a deadline. So I liked having that. My 11-year-old has started doing that in his good notes on his iPad with his little pencil too. So he was writing some, opened up a little notebook and started doing that as well. So hopefully that's useful. So yeah.
I can go.
Yeah.
I'm still in my break weeks, I guess. But I did manage. I wanted to, last week I said that I was going to rework or rewrite or polish a short story that I want to submit. And I did do that, and I submitted it to my writing group. And I think that it's on its way to be a really good piece that I can submit. I'm just waiting. I originally wrote it also for NYC in the short story challenge. So I'm waiting for the feedback, which will be next week, so that I can have like a full picture of how it's working or not working, and then find places to submit it. And I also did the 100-word microfiction, and that took almost all Saturday in brainstorming and coming up with ideas and then polishing it. And I was telling Michelle and Josie that I practice before these challenges. I do several, like I think of ideas and I write them in 100-word or 200-word, depending on the challenge, so that I get into the, I don't know, I flex my muscles. And it's happened 2 times that what I write as an exercise ends up fitting into the prompt that I get. So it's worked really well. Actually, the short story that I sent on Sunday, it also, I had already written the newspaper headlines, and so when I got the prompt, I just like everything fell into place, and I just used that I already had. I don't know, it's something that I do that helps, just preparing myself for the challenge and having ideas prior to it, so that you don't feel like, I have nothing to write and I don't know what to do with this. Anyway, so that was my week.
Writing those the microfiction is flash fiction a little bit, but microfiction especially. It's a different kind of. It really is. You do have to kind of get in a different mindset with that. So it's good.
Instructive
Elisa
though.
also added in.
Sorry, I was going to say it's really instructive to write microfiction. It helps you focus on all the most elemental parts of composition, of craft, because you have so little time and you're trying to say as much as you can, or at least a lot, in 100 words or 250 words, whatever you know are doing. and also some of us are judging a microfiction contest right now,
Yeah.
and that's also instructive. It's just
Yeah.
focusing on the language is really reading like a writer, and writing so deliberately is a meditation on the qualities that we need to work on as writers in our craft.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually probably a good segue, because we were kind of had the idea about talking about last lines as kind of a topic for today, as a writer's topic, but also, just microfiction kind of exposes that, especially like because there's only so many lines. uh you're a lot of times, well, one thing that we're, whenever we're reading, Story Street is having a microfiction contest, 100-word story. I mean, it's closed for submissions right now, but if you happen to want to join that next time, you can always, look at our newsletter. We'll be doing another one in the summer here sometime. We don't have that scheduled just yet, um, but yeah, whenever we're reading those stories, it actually becomes apparent. A lot of times there'll be like some really good stories that we're choosing between, and what it comes down to might be like the last line, like one thing, and often it is the last line that is like the deciding fact. We've even had it where like there was something that was a might have otherwise been a better story, but because the last line weakened it, it ended up being that we went with the other one. At least I know I've been in that choice when choosing between some. um so yeah, uh last lines.
I think it's heartbreaking too when you have a really good story and then you get to that
Mhm.
last line and you're like, no, why? And a lot of times they're explanatory lines. They're just not trusting their readers
Yeah,
to get it.
that is the biggest one I've seen.
Yeah, I had a great story that was, it was well, the way our judging works is in each of the first two rounds we have random groups of stories, and we pick a story or two stories to advance to the next round. And if there are too many good stories in there, we can just re-randomize and pick another group. But we advance however many stories we think really need to be advanced. But usually it ends up being one story in round one. And I was reading a group, and I was reading through the fifth story, and I was up until then I was kind of struggling with how which of these stories I might pick as I read the first four. And then when I got to the fifth one, I'm halfway through and I'm thinking, I've got my story. this
Mhm.
this section is going to be easy because this is such a good story. And then I get to the last line, and it's just a summary of the story. The story had done such a masterful job of good syntax and not overriding, not telling us anything twice. Nice soft touch, subtle but still leading us through a coherent story. And it just had the whole picture. And then at the end it was one of those, and so he ended up sad on a day that he thought he would be happy or something like that. And and i just I couldn't push it forward. It just took the whole story and made it. uh it was a painful experience for me. I know that sounds crazy, but it was a painful experience for me because I saw such a good bit of writing and I really wanted it to advance, but that would have been unfair to another story in the group that did a decent job. And
And that might be something that could recover in like a 7,000-word story, but in 100 words, if that's all you have to work with, and 10% of them, like the last 10 words, for example, are, that's a chunk.
Do you think people think they have to have 100 words? Because it's a maximum of 100 words, and maybe their story
I don't
ends
think
and then
anybody's
they.
been. I don't think there's been a lot that have been exactly 100.
I had about a 50-word story, maybe even 45 or 40, but about a 50-word story, no more, that I advanced because it was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, but that's something that happens a lot of times whenever we're sharing stuff with our critique groups and stuff. That's like that. I'd have to say it probably one of the most common things that'll come up like across types of writing, across story things is I don't think you need the last line.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times it doesn't ruin it, but it is just like it's maybe stronger to not have it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I
think it's sorry. I think it's a nice exercise to sometimes just take away to see how it looks. Just to take away the last line, last two lines, last paragraph. But and as we were talking in my manuscript, in my 62,000 word manuscript, I had a line at the end, and it's really telling when you share something and 3 or 4 people without discussing it first tell you you don't need this line. That's when it's like you definitely don't need that line. And I was working in a metaphor about flowers and how they bloom and how they die in the winter or whatever. And I was not trusting my reader, like Michelle said, because the last line used to be, we will bloom again, like trying to match the metaphor. And I had already matched it without me realizing, or I didn't trust the reader enough. And you have to trust your reader. And if you shoe everything for them, then it takes away the pleasure of understanding what the author thinks, or even interpreting. Sometimes it's something that you didn't even realize you were saying, and that's what the reader gets. But you have to trust that the white space is just as impactful or important as the word on the page.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, is that like it's either not trusting your reader or not trusting your ability as a writer. Like that you think you've got to like spoon feed it to your reader because you haven't done a good enough job, or you think that they're just not going to catch it. So I definitely agree on that. And I feel like that's a lot of what we see is like these really great stories. Then they have this like line that's like, and here's what I told you. And it's like, okay, but now all the punch, all like the feeling you gave me is deflated and it's gone.
Yeah.
Mixing
it's like
metaphors there real bad. Yes.
Yeah. It's exactly like whenever we're like, you know, a guy walks into a bar and he says, ow. And you end it there, it's fine. And if you say no, because it was an actual bar that hit him in the face, that really, you know, undermines the entire joke, right? Then the person who got it and was going to laugh at it, they feel insulted, or they feel a little bit like, yeah, now you're just wasting my time or something. So I think that's something. And I want to make sure we're clear. This is obviously not something that's happening with every story. We have very good stories, and we have picks and winners and stuff. And it is something that's probably one of the more common, what we'll say, deciding factors that would push a story in one direction or another. Is just it from our judging, but also in my own writing. I know I've gotten that feedback. We've talked about Elisa. You know, it's not always that it's messing it up. Sometimes it's just not necessary, or it's weakening it. Like there's a moment that you could leave someone with, and to keep going, then that's not the last thing that they hear anymore, right? And then that can kind of weaken the resonance. That can be what's wrong with it.
Yeah, or they're tying it up in like they're tying it up in a neat little bow. Like maybe they're not explaining something they've already said, but they want to make sure that everything is resolved with every character, every storyline, or in a smaller piece, just making sure it's, you know. But some of the best things I've ever read are left ambiguous at the end, and you're not sure what's happening, but you imagine the characters living on to solve whatever, like you trust that they're going to solve these problems because you've come to know them, or maybe they won't because you've come to know 'em. But I think you make a much better, like you were saying about the joke, you connect to the person you're trying to communicate something to better when they're engaged in it by being able to process and respond, um, instead of just, I don't know, think about how kids read when they were little. They had to get the happy ending, right? They needed that because of where they were cognitively. But then as they get older, they're able to handle things that are more ambiguous or
Mhm.
thought provoking.
Yeah.
No, and
And
sometimes
if you
a
think
story
about
is.
it, no, go ahead.
No, I
Go
talk
ahead.
too much. Go ahead.
It's just, I mean, and I was thinking about, for example, story endings that leave you, whenever a book, especially in novels, leaves you like thinking over and over for a week. I think that's a very successful novel. And for example, the ending of The Road from Cormac McCarthy, I don't know if everyone's familiar with it. I'm not sure, but it talks about a fish. I remember it talks about it, but it goes so, you have the story and you have this father and the son and they go through all of this, and then at the end you're not sure what's going to happen to these characters, but that's why it leaves you thinking and it leaves you inside the story, because when you ended up and you tell me exactly what happened, like in the 80s movies, at the end they would tell you, this character went on to marry such and such, and this character went on, and that was a really typical way of ending movies in the 80s, where you would get a final resolution of what happened to all of these characters. But when you leave them just going out into the world, then they live inside, you get to decide in your head what happens with the endings of these characters, and that leaves you more, because if it's closed, then you have nothing to give to the story. But when it's open, then you can be, as a reader, you can still be part of the ending. It's your own ending, and I think that that's really powerful. So that's, it was, and we were talking about this yesterday, it was such an exciting, like, or an aha moment even for me, realizing that leave, like, putting that final touch that doesn't work for, not always, sometimes it does, but some of the times it doesn't help the story. So just thinking about leaving things open, it was a really eye-opening experience.
Well,
Your comments bring to mind two things that I've heard Michael say, and one of them is that a last line that is a shift in narration can actually really work well if it moves the story forward in some way. And if it's a big shift, it might alter how we see the whole story. It might have a big effect on the theme. It might have a big effect on the resolution of the plot. But it has to do something. It can't just tell us what has already been done. It has to do something. Uh, and the other thing that it makes me think of, that I've heard Michael say, he was talking just a moment ago about trust and how the writer has to trust the reader, because it's such a joy as a reader to not just be told a story, but to find a story as the writer sort of takes us through a walk in the woods that is similar, you know, that is the story but isn't over explaining. The flip side of that trust is that someone, when they decide to read, there's so much you can choose to read, and when someone chooses to read us, they're choosing for a reason, and there's a certain amount of trust that they have for us, and we can't break that trust right at the end. We can't, you know, we're being trusted too, and we have to be cognizant of that and have that relationship with the writer.
I mean, there's a lot of ways that the last line can affect the story. You want it to resonate, and it could be that it can be the speaking of 80s, the classic 80s horror movie where, suddenly Freddy's glove pops out of the floor or something and you suddenly, oh no, he's not really dead. But as long as it doesn't take over and take away the rest of the story, like you could also have if this was a movie, for example, you have this whole, just, I don't know why I'm going to a movie, but if you have this whole breakup, relationship situation that you just watch, I don't know if you've watched that clenching inducing movie, The Breakup, but if you watch that and then you had to go sit and watch the one of the main characters go to a bar and then start talking about what just happened. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right? We just had the story. We don't need to be, explained the story again. But you can also have it where he goes and you have the Kaiser Sose ending, where suddenly every bit of the story that you were just told has a new meaning because of the last few seconds of what you just watched. And now every scene that you had watched, every scene that you read has new meaning because, and I don't know, is it been long enough that we don't have to worry about spoilers with the Usual
Oh,
Suspects?
or
But
Sixth Sense.
yeah, but you could you could get this kind of a thing where, yes, sometimes it can be a gimmicky thing where you're trying to shock the surprise ending or something like that. But it can also be something I think The Usual Suspects is an example of where it's narratively weaving the entire thing in a way that right, you have and probably just because it's a very Citizen Kane would have been a good example. Whenever it first came out, obviously that's one that we don't have to worry about spoiling. Everybody knows
Yeah.
Rosebud.
Mhm.
That the entire movie is trying to figure out what that is, and now you're given a scene at the end that tells you what it means, and because of that, we understand that all of the other scenes that we watched had a different meaning to that main character because he had no joy in any of it, because all of his joy was back at his beginning there, that was all gone. So
that made me think
yeah.
of the opposite extreme, shock for just shock's sake, and how that happens
Yeah.
sometimes when you're reading,
that can
especially
be a flaw.
entries, right? Shock just for shock's sake doesn't always work if it's not
Yeah.
authentic to the story. And I think I do see that instead of, oh, she was actually dead. But then you look back and you're like, why was she actually dead? Like those last lines
Yeah.
that they're trying to just do something fantastic, but it hasn't been earned, which I think we talk a lot about too, earning
Mhm.
the surprise ending.
The Crying Game is another great example of a final moment in a movie that changed the whole movie. There's Chinatown, arguably the best movie made. There's a moment at the end that sort of defines and redefines everything that's happened.
There's also this movie with Edward Norton, and I think it was Richard Gere. Do you remember what was it called? That he was on trial for murder, and he said that he had multiple personalities. I don't even remember that movie. I don't remember the name. But also at the ending makes you have to rewatch now
Primal
so that
Fear?
you can catch. I think Primal Fear. It was Richard Gere, right? I remember who I'm sure Edward Norton.
He's in
was
that
the,
one.
Yeah. Those are the type of stories. And again, it's so great in a book when you read it and you say, now I have to read it again. Or even in a story, now I have to read it again to understand, to get it based on this. But that's when your ending is very good and it changes your whole perspective of everything that you've read. That's fantastic. Now, but we were talking about the other side when you give it away. Like, oh, but did you see? The thing is that he was lying all along.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, but you didn't have space to interpret it for yourself. And it's amazing because every time that I've done this, that I think that I need to clarify something, like everyone who's read it already gets it. So you need to trust that people are going to get it, even if you think that it's hard. And at least I like it being hard. I like stories being like not giving me all the answers. I know that it's not maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I do like stories that are hard to, because they're harder to crack, and then you feel satisfied that you understood it.
Hemingway, to go
You're
back from
muted.
movies to writing. Me? No.
Oh, sorry.
No, Michelle.
Go ahead, Jack. I was talking, but
Oh,
I was
I was going to
muted.
say. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. I'll just say quickly. Hemingway went through a period where his stories. He had a collection of short stories, 49 stories, and he got a lot of grief from the critics at the time because they were too hard to figure out. But here it is, basically 100 years later, and people still talk about 49 stories as part of this discussion, and also argue about what happened in some of the stories. So that's the effect of what you're talking about, not movies, but in writing. And Hemingway's a jackass, no question about it. But sorry, that might be a contentious issue. But I can't stand the
No,
guy.
he just
But
can't defend himself. So
I don't think
yeah,
that
it's easy.
that's I don't know if that's contentious.
No.
I think it's pretty regarded.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Hemingway's a jackass. I'll go along with that then. But those stories are fun to read for the reason that Eliza was talking about. It's not just an exploration; it's a deep exploration. I think if I read a whole novel where I was constantly trying to figure out things, then I might not enjoy that. But the short story, they're like 1,500 words. They're quick reads and they're fun. And the critics referred to them as puzzles. And that was, that could be a legitimate complaint, but I enjoyed them.
So I think when talking about being too hard to understand, or not understand, but you just can't follow it because the writing is just too vague or whatever. I've noticed in, like, when you think about the craft of writing, people who use multiple perspectives often fall in that trap. It's one of the hardest things to avoid, because you do have to have some direction to your readers. It could be structurally, by a name at the beginning of each chapter, something that simple, or time and a date. I'm reading a book right now, and there's 2 timelines, and there's 2 missing children from the same family. And there's all these people involved in 2 different searches, and some of them are in both time periods. And it is really hard to follow, even though she has the date and the character name. You once you're a few pages past the chapter, you're like, wait a minute, which kid, where are they? Oh, it's in the same location where they go missing. So it's a good book, and there's so much that I really admire about it. But man, it's hard to follow. It's like I need a chart.
That's like the opposite effect. Like you can try and hammer it over too much, that you're trying to explain too much, that you're not trusting your writing or the reader. You're basically telling the story again, or you can. That's the thing that a lot of writers, they want to sound mysterious. They want to have it be a mystery or something to pull the reader forward, and they withhold too much, because yes, a mystery pulls the reader forward, but they have to have something to understand what it is that they want to know. They have to have it. If they can't form a clear question, that mystery isn't going to pull them forward. You can withhold too, and that's not just about mystery stories. I mean, like in general, like, the person was waiting outside the door, and they were already late, and and okay, there's a little bit of a mysterious situation, but if you keep going with that, you don't know who they're meeting or why, or what are the stakes. We need to understand
Stakes.
why
Yeah.
we care that we're
Mhm.
following. What question are we trying to wait around and keep reading and answer?
It
So,
has.
You're
uh-oh,
muted.
did you accidentally?
We lost
I
your.
think her audio
Oh,
just
there
went.
you go.
Oh, my audio glitch. I was just
No,
saying
now
you have
you
to
got
be
it.
you have to be compelling without being frustrating,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
delicate balance.
yeah. This made me think
There's
when I was in college, I took being obviously I studied Latin American literature, well, literature in Spanish, because we also saw from Spain. But we had a class on Mexican literature, and there's this book which is really good, and it's short. If you ever want to read Mexican literature, it's called Pedro Páramo. It's from I forgot the name of the author, but the book, oh God, Pedro Páramo. And I remember, it's Pedro Páramo. Yeah, it's also I think they did a Netflix series recently. Um, I blank out sometimes in the information. Anyway, and we had an exam on this book in the class, and it was one question, and the question was what happened at the end of the story. And I remember I took this class with the communication students, and we were the lit majors, and the lit majors were like, and the communication students were baffled by the questions, like, what do you mean what happens at the end? And it was 0 or 100, like we were in 100 scale in grading wise. And I'm not going to give it away, but it's really interesting because the whole book, it's sort of a this type of movie that we're talking about, that the ending is, but it's vague, so you need to pay a lot of attention. But at the same time, it's so good, it's so good that you have to figure it out, and that's the whole point. And then talking about structure, also in Latin American authors, Julio Cortázar, he's an Argentinian author. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. He's really good. He has this book called Rayuela, which means hopscotch in English. And he gives you two options of how to read the book. You can either read it like continuously, and it's, I think, from chapter 50 on or something, or you can do it alternate chapters. And so he gives you like chapter 1, and then you have to go to chapter 40 or whatever, and it's two stories in one, depending on how you read it. Either you choose to mix the chapters, or you just go chronologically. And it's very hard to follow, but it's a great book. Same thing. But it's not as like frustratingly so, but you have to pay a lot of attention. So but I think I'm the type of reader who likes that challenge. So maybe it has to do with how I was, of the preparation that I had in college, because I read this really, really, really dense books.
There was
from the craft perspective. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, you go ahead.
This is really quick. From the craft perspective, there's another approach to it. Sometimes if you feel like you need that sentence, then it's really an indication that you haven't done a good job of giving the reader enough clues to explore the story themselves. That you've left too much in the white space. So it's a thought. Maybe it's just not, as a writer, if you're editing, that you need to cut out that last line. You need to look at everything that made you feel like that last line was needed.
Well, and it's not always the last line, but there was sorry, the book you were just talking about, Elisa, reminded me there was a Hugo, I think it was either a Hugo or Nebula nominated story a few years ago, and I think it had to do with some like time travel situation. But it read forwards or backwards. Like you could read
Wow.
each line forwards, and then
That's so
and
cool.
actually it was structured so that it actually started with line 1 through line 100, then line 99 back down to line 1. So you were actually reading the story, and it was actually really well done. Talk about a lot of control over structure. But yeah, you tell the whole story, and once you've told the whole story, don't tell part of the story. Make sure that the story itself is told. It doesn't necessarily have to have every mystery. Some of the mysteries are part of the story, but you also don't tell it twice, and make sure that, once you've told the story, get out. Like those are, I guess, the rules right there. Or that's how you make it work. But even you can have a switch. I was thinking, yes, you can have a switch at the end where it switches, but you don't always have to have that at the end either. That actually is something that last time I'm going to a movie, Shawshank Redemption, the switch, everybody thinks of that as the ending, but that actually happens about halfway through, like whenever you realize what's happening, and the rest of it is wrapping up. It's I'd say actually Shawshank Redemption has like a caper story structure, because you have the switch.
Was it a short story to
explain.
begin with?
It was a novella.
A novella,
which is a short story for Stephen King. I mean, to be
Right.
honest, that's as short as he gets. I don't know.
Shawshank is Stephen King's?
Yes.
I'm just learning that. Okay, mind blown.
Yes. Yeah.
So I like your quote. Once you're done with the story, get out.
Get out. Yeah.
Or Freddy Krueger will pop. Or Freddy Krueger will pop back up.
Once you're done, get out. I think that's the takeaway from today.
Yeah. But yeah, tell the whole story. And once it's done, don't tell any more. The other day I mentioned George Saunders, and George, if you're watching this, first of all, hi, drop us a line. But no, George Saunders has a book which is called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is actually kind of, he wrapped up one of the classes that he gives on Russian literature, and it analyzes a bunch of Russian short stories, and one of them by the breakdown and analysis. These are not going to be stories that everybody is going to probably love. Russian literature is not for everyone necessarily that deep, but there's a lot of lessons that he's able to extract from this, and one of them, there's a Tolstoy short story called Alyosha the Pot, and he shows like breaking down like he's doing for most of this, and at the very end, the last sentence has kind of, I think it's actually the last two sentences. He actually comes to the end, and then there's like, oh, but then this sentence, which is like, whoa, okay, that's a different, and then this sentence, oh, well, then that does something else altogether. And he does a great job of breaking down the techniques of these writers who are writing masterfully. There's a lot to be learned from Russian literature, even if you usually would not come anywhere near reading that. So I can recommend his book for anybody who wants to really get into story, analyzing the nuts and bolts of stories with practical examples.
All of this has been very enlightening for me, because I work on long projects. Like I worked on 2 novels. I took a short story class in the program. That was my first creative writing class, but it was because it was the only one open. Because since you're not accepted yet to the program, you don't get to choose. Like you have to take pro seminar, and then you have to take another writing class, and it was the only one open. I liked it, but I usually work on longer things. So learning the craft of the short story has been an exercise in creativity for me. And I find it absolutely thrilling to have to push myself to do something so small when I always think so big. So, but again, and talking about this yesterday, reading other short stories, microfiction, flash, it helps you understand how you can deliver a punch in such small, how other people do it. I think that's the main thing. Like reading it and immersing yourself in it, you start to see, okay, this is effective because, and then you see, okay, it's thinking outside the box, not saying the same thing. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I sometimes go into the NYC the website, and it has, they published the winner from the challenges, and it's really interesting to find how people do that. And it also helps. There was this one story, I think it won, I don't remember if it the 250 word or the 100 word, but it was talking about a little girl that was in the hospital. And every time he explained the color, like he would say, like, I don't know, red, and in a bracket, he would put the name of the red that comes in the Crayola box. And I found that so creative, because he was giving you clues to the ambience based on, and using something that we all know. We all know that the Crayolas have a name, and very peculiar names, by the way, like cerulean blue, or even there, whatever. But it was a really great. Okay, so I was okay. So you can actually do something different, and I was thinking of, like, how can I do something different based on what I just read? So yeah, it's been I had never submitted anything before I started participating in these challenges, and it's helped my craft overall, not only just in the short writing thing, but even in the long work.
Elisa, that's a great plug, that writers need to read good writing and keep doing it. Like, that has to be part of your process.
Mm-hmm.
I've read that story as well, Elisa. Maybe it was referred from the same teacher, but I also found that quality of it really instructive, and you know, it really brought us back to the tone of the, you know, the contrast between what was happening to the child and what a child's world is supposed to be. It was that tone, both of
Yeah.
the playfulness and the seriousness, and
Mhm.
it's all, you know,
Yeah.
it was a good example of putting a lot of information from the story into the white space.
Yeah.
And yeah, it all of this to say, I guess, take a look at it's not just your last line, but especially your last line, to see what are you undermining your story at the very end, I guess, because that's that's the danger, I guess, of some of the things that we've talked about, and then other things too. Like, yes, there might be a story. If your name is Jorge Luis Borges and you are writing a story, yes, probably people do need you to explain it to them.
Yeah.
But but maybe you do that in the article that comes out afterwards. But
Mhm.
I think, though, like, yeah, sometimes that can be part of the story, or something, like you can add something. But if it's not adding, and if it's just trying to reinforce, then look at the other lines and make sure that those are doing their job. And I mean, yeah, first lines, last lines, but this is just a particular thing that we've noticed. If you're doing something different with your story, that this doesn't apply, Borges, hey Jorge, uh, yeah, he's not going to be watching.
He's
Then
dead.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe someday he'll be watching. We'll see.
And
Yes,
maybe he is
so far.
watching. Who knows?
Maybe
Who
he is
knows?
watching. Yeah.
Jorge,
Let's
maybe
channel
he's
Jose Luis Borges.
somewhere in
Amazing.
another one of his 14 paths. He is still watching.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think that this is a good topic. This is definitely something to think about. Look at it. Nobody's telling you to cut out your last line, but it's a good exercise. And just like it's a good exercise to cut out your first line or your first paragraph and see if your story still works, and if so, figure out why. So
Yeah. By the way, Michael, good job on pronouncing Borges. 'Cause I took a class. We read one of his essays in class, and there was a Borges, and I was
Borges?
like, Borges,
Oh, yes.
Borges,
No,
because
no.
he's Argentinian, like Cortázar. And I was thinking, just one last, if you ever have time, Julio Cortázar has this series of short stories that are instructions to do everyday things. So it's instructions to how you say with the clock. you wind instructions to wind the clock and instructions to go up a staircase. And he describes very mundane things in very creative ways, like put one foot in front of the other, but don't do both at the same time because you'll fall, but in a very quirky way. Julio Cortázar, I'll put him in the chat, and those short stories are great as an example of how you can also convey a story using very unorthodox writing or ways, and just having fun with it, I think.
Well, and see, that's using this actual trend or this sort of thing, like this effect, as a way to add something to it. Like you're playing against that type, and by doing that, but he's actually using in a way all throughout the story the technique that we're talking about ruining your story with, to form his story, which is great. So do we want to go around and talk about this? So next week, okay. Next week I'm probably going to be flying. So we'll see. I don't know if we're going to do, if we do next week, somebody else will load it up. We might be on break for 2 weeks. Do we want to do, be knocking on the beginning of the month? Do we want to do a submission party again? We did a few weeks ago, where we go through. I mean, I don't know if that's completely
let's
boring
do
to
that.
everybody
That sounds
watching
great.
at home,
That sounds
but
great.
it's very, very valuable to me. So, okay. So next episode, either next week or the following week, on Monday. We might have a skip week. We're going to do another live stream submission party. So Subs and
Cool.
Grinders will be back. And then, but let's go around and talk about our goals between now and thence. Nounced and thence. I'll just go ahead and go first, since I'm already talking. I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing with the little writing scribbles, my daily writing, which is not daily as a rule, but it is more daily than not doing any. So that's what I'm going to keep doing for now. Maybe once in the next few weeks, I'm going to come back to my some of my larger works that I'm working on, and I'm going to get some stuff ready for the submission party. So.
I can go. I'm going to make the changes to the short story that we saw yesterday. I'm gonna expand another short story that I want to have ready for the submission party. I have to check a personal essay, and I had thought about not submitting it again, but I was inspired by Michelle at the 28 rejections. So I'm gonna push it to see if it finds a place. And so I think this week is rewriting. And also I want to do sort of exercises on things to get ready for, I hope to pass to the next round in NYC. So to the short story challenge. So I'll get that information on Monday. So I would be writing next week, but I like to prepare and to throw out ideas so I can have something that I can fall back on when I get my challenge.
I'm taking a course in personal essays that we're basically talking about memoir for the most part, and I'm going to write a section on a moment where I considered committing a crime, and I want the last line to create an ambiguity about whether or not I committed that crime, but also, or to leave an ambiguity about whether or not I committed that crime, but also to put a twist on what it would mean to do that or to not do that. That's what I'm after. That's what the moment captured for me in real life, and that's what I'm after. So it's a writing exercise informed by today's talk. And what I just said, that last sentence, so it's a writing exercise informed by today's last talk, is an
Lit.
example of a last line I really should not have had. I should have just shut up right before that line.
So Jack, someone stole my wallet at Kohl's. Was that you? Is that the crime? I am going to spend this week getting back to my novel, which I desperately need to do. And I'm also working on a article for Story Street about this very topic. Final sentences of, I'll probably focus on short fiction. So if anybody's
Call it
interested,
last words.
last words, yeah, famous last words. But I thought if anybody's interested in that article or any other article that you can sign up for the newsletter on storystreet.com and you will see the up and coming stories.
I am going to polish up some stuff for our submissions party. And then I am trying to get back into my novel in any way, shape, or form that takes. No rules, just finding my way back there.
Sounds good. Write your way back in. It's the write your way through the door. All right. I think that's it. Does for this week then. Your homework assignment is to keep going, guys. And we'll see you next week or in 2 weeks. If you happen to join our live stream party over there, make sure you bring yourself bring your works that are ready to submit. Polished does not necessarily mean perfect. It just means ready to submit. So, it's done when somebody accepts it, and we'll see you over there. But that's it for this week. Thanks a lot. All right. Stopped uploading.
So
There they
next
go.
Yeah,
week we don't.
I had an idea, Michael, while we were doing this.